What is your name, please?
My name is Ted Geisel.
Hey everybody, I'm Joshua Orro, the Mustang Prince, and welcome to Mustang Prince Orro Reports. Now, for those who don't know, Dr. Seuss is one of my childhood favorite authors, and for as long as I can remember, his books have always filled my imagination with all sorts of whimsical things. Also, I previously blogged 4 Dr. Seuss movies, and since my friends at Musical Theater Village are almost ready to perform Seussical again, why don't I look back at an early 90s documentary about Dr. Seuss? So, released a home video on September 14th, 1994, this is In Search of Dr. Seuss. Now, before I get started, I would like to let all my viewers know that this is probably my first time blogging a documentary. So anyway, let's get started. In this documentary, a reporter named Kathy Lane visits the Geisel house in hopes to get an article of Dr. Seuss. Shortly, Kathy is transported into the Dr. Seuss world, where the Cat in the Hat introduces her to Dr. Seuss's life and work while encountering many classical Dr. Seuss characters and stories. So, what are my thoughts? Well, ever since I first saw it on VHS at my grandmother's place back when I was about 5 years old, I think, I had a lot of fun watching this, and it was also very interesting, whimsical, and educational while I was growing up. And to further explain why I love this documentary, let's move on to Mustang Notes. Now, this documentary was directed by Vincent Patterson, who has had an expansive career in many parts of the entertainment industry, including film, theater, Broadway, concert tours, opera, music videos, television, and commercials. And the documentary was written and produced by Keith R. Clark. Also, as a minor note, this film introduced me to 2 animated films that would later become some of my favorites, like The Swan Princess and The Halloween Tree. Now, some of my favorite parts about this documentary is when we hear short retellings, animated segments, and songs from classical Dr. Seuss stories, like The Sneetches from the 1973 animated special animated by DePatie Freeling, which I used to watch during my childhood on this VHS, McElligot's Pool with the late Graham Jarvis as the farmer and Brady Blum as Marco, Horton Hatches the Egg from the 1942 Merry Melodies cartoon directed by Bob Clampett, and to think that I saw it on Mulberry Street from the 1944 George Pal stop-motion puppetoon and told by Marco, played by J.D. Daniels, who voiced a teenage Prince Derek in The Swan Princess, Yertle the Turtle, sung by the late Andrea Crouch, Bright Eyes, and the Turtle Choir, which, in my opinion, is such an uplifting, powerful, and catchy gospel song, The Cat in the Hat, narrated by the late, great Robin Williams while he's reading to his daughter Zelda and her friend Eleanor Columbus. Then there's Green Eggs and Ham, sung by Howie Mandel, whom I remember from the Gremlins movies, along with Lil Howie's Funhouse CD-ROM games, How the Grinch Stole Christmas from the 1966 Chuck Jones special, and narrated by the late Eileen Brennan, who got to be in The New Adventures of Pippi Longstocking. Then there's The Lorax from the 1972 DePatie Freeling animated special, narrated by the Onceler, voiced by Bob Holt. And there's the Butter Battle book from the 1989 animated special by Ralph Bakshi. You know, that's pretty bizarre that a guy who gave us weird and raunchy stuff like Cool World, Coonskin, and Fritz the Cat would adapt a Dr. Seuss special. And finally, there's Oh the Places You'll Go, sung by Kathy Lane and the Cat in the Hat. And in my opinion, this song feels like something that you'd listen to when you're about to enter a new age of growing up, or when you're about to graduate from school. You know, I feel like some of these books have a very interesting history behind them. For example, The Sneetches, which was published in 1961, was based on Dr. Seuss's outcasted boyhood when kids yelled Kaiser at him because he was of German descent, and back then, Germans were considered the enemy because it was around World War I at the time. McElligot's Pool from 1947 was inspired by Dr. Seuss's early family life, and it was dedicated to his father, Theodore Robert Geisel, whom was the world's greatest authority on blackfish, fiddler crab, and deagle trout. The Horton stories give a sweet lesson about courage and loyalty. Oh, fun fact, Horton Hatches the Egg from 1940 was the very first Horton book that I've ever read before I read books like Horton Hears a Who and Horton and the Cougar Bug. In 1937, and to think that I saw it on Mulberry Street was Dr. Seuss's first book that he ever wrote and published. Yertle the Turtle from 1950 was inspired by Adolf Hitler. The Cat in the Hat from 1957 was a challenge by John Hersey of Life magazine for Dr. Seuss to write a primer for classrooms, and I'm pretty surprised that that book contains about 225 basic words. Green Eggs and Ham from 1960 was Dr. Seuss's way to influence everybody to try out new things, and believe it or not, it was one of the very first Dr. Seuss books that my mother read to me during my childhood. The Grinch, which was also from 1957, was Dr. Seuss's second favorite book that he's ever written, and as I stated a while ago, it was Dr. Seuss's way of getting the Christmas commercialism off his chest. And I still stand by that The Grinch is one of my very favorite Christmas stories. Plus, The Grinch became the subject of the very first choir show that I participated in at school, and I also got to play the Grinch in Seussical during 2012 and 2016. And soon, it'll be my friend Igor's turn to do it. Also, I would like to let everybody know that I have plans to blog Halloween as Grinch Night sometime this fall. Later, during 1971, The Lorax became Dr. Seuss's absolute favorite book that he's ever written, and it was inspired by his and his second wife Audrey's trip to Africa when some odd-looking trees were being felled. Plus, I like the story's moral that unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better. It's not. Moving on, I found it very shocking that Dr. Seuss was accused of frightening children with the Butter Battle book back in 1984. And I'm kind of worried that the same thing might happen to me while I play General Genghis Khan Schmitz this season. Also, fun fact, Dr. Seuss did not spread his butter up or down. He spread his butter on the edge. Funny, huh? Lastly, in January of 1990, about 9 months before I was born, Oh the Places You'll Go was the very last book that Dr. Seuss has ever written before he died from cancer on September 24th, 1991, 4 days after my first birthday, when he was about 87 years old. Plus, that story was Dr. Seuss's way of explaining the ups and downs of the entire human experience. Nowadays, Dr. Seuss's books not only bring back tons of childhood memories, but they also make me want to look back at these live-action or animated Dr. Seuss movies. Plus, I hear that soon in the following years, Warner Animation Group, or WAG for short, will be adapting 2 Dr. Seuss stories, The Cat in the Hat and Oh the Places You'll Go, and a spin-off called Thing 1 and Thing 2. By the way, in my opinion, the most thought-provoking moment in this documentary would have to be the World War II scene, where we learn that Dr. Seuss illustrated several political cartoons to poke fun at Adolf Hitler and the Nazis. Speaking of which, Dr. Seuss felt that Hitler was a real threat to the entire world and just had to be stopped. And for those who don't know, my favorite ad would have to be this one, because of its message stating, if we don't move faster than turtles, we may never see victory. Also, during the war, Dr. Seuss and his first wife Helen not only worked with It's a Wonderful Life's Frank Capra, but they also made a documentary for Warner Brothers called Hitler Lives. And while that was my least favorite part of this movie when I was little, now that I'm older and that I understand the history of World War II, I can deeply see why it won an Academy Award for Best Documentary Short Subject. Plus, Dr. Seuss didn't want anyone to forget what had happened and what could happen again. And now let's move on to the cast. Let's begin with Kathy Lane, a reporter from the Ferncast Times, played by Kathy Najimy, who's best known from Cats Don't Dance, Pixar's WALL-E, the extraterrestrial alien encounter, which is now extinct at the Magic Kingdom in Walt Disney World, and Disney's Hocus Pocus, which will be getting a sequel on Disney Plus next year. Now, throughout this documentary, Kathy is hoping to get a full story on Dr. Seuss, and she takes notes in her notebook. Plus, I just love the part where Kathy reads stories like The Sneetches and Horton Hatches the Egg. Next up is Kathy's guide, The Cat in the Hat, played by Matt Frewer, whom was in Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, Disney's Hercules, Night at the Museum 3, and the BFG from 2016. Plus, Matt Frewer voiced Chaos from Aladdin the Animated Series. Now, while Mike Myers is pretty much a guilty pleasure cat in my opinion, I think Matt Frewer gives the cat a more childhood charm. Plus, I think he shows a lot of humor when he tells Kathy several details about Dr. Seuss. My favorites being the details about Dr. Seuss's art and the origin of his author name. Speaking of which, in one scene, the cat mentions that there were 13 books under the name T. Lasigue, which happens to be Geisel spelled backwards. The first Dr. Seuss character that Kathy meets, aside from the Cat in the Hat himself, is Mr. Hunch, played by Christopher Lloyd, best known from the Back to the Future trilogy, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, DuckTales the Movie, Treasure of the Lost Lamp, The Page Master, Don Bluth's Anastasia, and of course, he's the current Master Xehanort after Leonard Nimoy and Rutger Hauer's death. Now, if you guys don't know what a hunch is, he's from this book. Anyway, in this documentary, Mr. Lloyd Hunch tells Kathy about Dr. Seuss's boyhood in Springfield, Massachusetts during the early 1900s. Plus, he mentions a time when Ted and his father went trout fishing. Next we come to the ad man and the ad woman, played by David Paymer and Andrea Martin. They explain about Dr. Seuss's advertising business. To me, they're the zaniest characters in this documentary, and some of my favorite ads that they talk about are the Seuss Navy, which was the largest navy during the 1930s, and there's also the Flit, which is a pesticide. Plus, they mention that Dr. Seuss went to Lincoln University in Oxford, where he met his first wife, Helen Palmer, and they also talk about how Geisel got his doctor title while he was working for Judge Magazine in New York. Next is Sergeant Mulvaney, played by Patrick Stewart, best known from the X-Men franchise, TMNT from 2007, Hayao Miyazaki's Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind, The Prince of Egypt, Jimmy Neutron, Boy Genius, Bambi 2, and Legends of Oz, Dorothy's Return. In my opinion, Sergeant Mulvaney is a very dashing and formal man, and I found it interesting when he explains to Kathy about why Dr. Seuss created Marco's father with a no-nonsense personality while writing Mulberry Street. It's because Dr. Seuss knew that adults and teachers didn't realize how they could smother the imagination. Plus, he knew that it was a story that most folks didn't want to hear, but he was determined to push it through. Also, I liked the part where Mulvaney uses a revolving door while explaining to Kathy that 27 publishers rejected the Mulberry Street manuscript before Vanguard Press agreed to publish it. Plus, I also liked when Mulvaney says, "If you believe in something, my dear, never give up on it," which I find is an absolutely inspiring phrase. Another character to talk about is a radio known as the Voice of America, voiced by Billy Crystal, whom I remember from Pixar's Monsters, Inc. and Howl's Moving Castle. This character gives Kathy the scoop on everything related to Dr. Seuss during the World War II era by giving her scripts saying that while Dr. Seuss was working with Frank Capra, he produced a series of indoctrinational films that earned him a Legion of Merit Award, which is very impressive, by the way. Plus, the radio mentions that Seuss's original drawings of Yertle the Turtle had a little Hitler mustache and wore a Nazi uniform, and I'm pretty glad that he didn't use that concept for the book. Otherwise, that would have been way too controversial. Finally, we have Dr. Seuss himself, voiced by the late K.E. Cooter, who voiced Santa Claus in Annabelle's Wish. In my opinion, Kay gives Dr. Seuss's speeches a very inspirational feel, and it gives me the incentive to never shut out my brain and to keep my imagination and my childhood alive and running. And now let's move on to my final words. Overall, In Search of Dr. Seuss is an absolute excellent documentary, and it holds a very special place in my childhood. To me, this is a very educational and interesting movie, and I thought the sets and costumes were very creative, and I loved all the guest stars that appeared and the stories that were told throughout this film. Plus, the songs were filled with whimsical Seuss charm and flair. So, if you folks have not seen this film yet, I highly recommend it if you want to learn about Dr. Seuss's life and career. Also, aside from those animated Seuss films that have yet to be released by Warner Brothers, I've heard rumors that Wonder director Steven Chbosky will be making a Dr. Seuss biography film. And trust me, that sounds like something to really look forward to in the future. As for my final rating, well, I'll give In Search of Dr. Seuss a full 100%, because there's hardly a bad thing about this documentary, and every moment of it is pure Dr. Seuss joy. Well, that's all for now. Be sure to tune in again next time. Mustang Power!